412 people vanished in a single night. No fire, no flood, no bodies. Just gone. The map doesn't lie. The roads don't lie. But somewhere past the old stone bridge, 3 miles from a quiet farmhouse, an entire town disappeared off the face of the earth, and nothing was ever found again. By the end of this story, I would walk into the field where that town used to stand and find something the world had spent over 100 years insisting was impossible. My name is Eli Hartman, and this isn't a campfire story. This actually happened to me. I was 11 years old the first time I heard about Hollow Creek. My grandfather told it to me like a bedtime story. Houses, a church, a schoolhouse, a market square, 412 souls, until one morning all of it was simply gone. Not burned, not flooded, he said, his hand shaking as he pointed out the window toward an empty field. Gone, as if someone reached down from the sky and lifted it off the earth. I laughed at first. Towns don't disappear. People don't disappear. There's always an explanation, a fire, a flood, a war, something written in a history book somewhere. But when I asked my teacher about Hollow Creek the next day, she went pale and changed the subject. When I asked the town librarian, she pulled a thick folder from a locked drawer, looked at it for a long moment, and then put it back without opening it. What would you do if the last story your grandfather ever told you turned out to be completely true? Because 3 days later, he disappeared too. Not slowly, not with warning. He walked out into that same field one evening, the exact spot where the old town used to stand, and never came back. Police searched for 2 weeks. They found nothing. No footprints leading anywhere useful. No signs of struggle. Just his wool coat, folded neatly on a flat stone as if he'd set it down on purpose before walking somewhere he didn't need it anymore. That was 19 years ago. I did what anyone does with a wound that deep. I buried it. I moved to the city. I built an ordinary life, told myself a comfortable lie about a confused old man who wandered into the woods and never made it out. And for 19 years, that lie let me sleep at night. I had to believe it. The alternative was too strange to carry. Then, 3 weeks ago, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name, written in handwriting I hadn't seen in 19 years. My grandfather's handwriting. One sentence. The town isn't gone, Eli. It's waiting, and it's almost time again. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was a cruel joke, some distant relative messing with me, someone who'd found his old letters and decided to torment me for sport. But the paper was old, genuinely old, the kind that crumbles slightly at the corners, the kind you can't fake without trying very hard, and the ink had faded the way ink fades over decades, not days. So I did the only thing that made sense to a man who had spent 19 years trying not to think about this. I drove back. The farmhouse was still there, sold to strangers years ago, but I didn't go to the house. I went straight to the field. It looked exactly the way I remembered it. Wild grass swaying in slow waves, crooked black trees standing like sentries at its edges, and beneath it all, that strange silence. Not the silence of an empty field, a deliberate silence like the world was holding its breath. What would you do, standing at the edge of a field that swallowed your grandfather whole, knowing you might be next? I stood at the edge of that field for almost an hour before I noticed something I hadn't seen as a child. Faint depressions in the earth, barely visible beneath the grass, arranged in patterns too straight, too deliberate to be natural. Foundations, the outlines of buildings long buried beneath 19 years no more than a century, of overgrowth. Hollow Creek wasn't gone. It was under something, or behind something. And as the sun began to set behind the crooked trees, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 11 years old, standing at this same window, listening to my grandfather's trembling voice. I felt watched. For a moment, just before the light disappeared completely, I swore I saw a flicker of gold at the edge of that field, like a window glowing in a house that didn't exist. And standing in it, gone before I could be sure I'd seen it at all, the unmistakable outline of an old man in a wool coat. I told myself it was nothing. Grief plays tricks. Tired eyes see what they want to see. I was wrong. Local records, the ones the librarian had hidden from me as a child, are not so easily hidden from a grown man with a law degree and a stubborn streak. It took 2 days of phone calls and one uncomfortable visit to the county archive to learn the truth the town had buried for over 100 years. Hollow Creek wasn't just a town that vanished once. According to fragmented records, a few surviving letters, a damaged newspaper clipping, the testimony of a single surviving farmer recorded in 1888. It had vanished and reappeared before. Not constantly, not predictably, but in cycles. Every several decades, witnesses would report the faint outline of buildings in that field on certain nights, lights flickering where no lights should be, the sound of a church bell ringing where no church had stood for generations. And every time the town reappeared, someone from the nearby village vanished with it. The pattern was always the same. Someone who remembered, someone who had heard the old stories, who carried the truth in their bones the way my grandfather had carried it in his trembling hands. The town didn't take strangers. It took those who still believed in it. I sat in my car outside the county archive with that knowledge sitting heavy in my chest, and for the first time in 19 years, I understood exactly why my grandfather had looked so afraid the night he told me that story. He hadn't been warning me about a fairy tale. He had been warning me that I was now one of the people the town could see. And the letter in my pocket, the one with his handwriting, the one that shouldn't exist, suddenly felt less like a message from beyond and more like a summons. That night, I didn't go back to the motel. I drove straight to the field, parked at the edge of the old dirt road, and stepped out into air that felt thicker than it should have, colder than the season allowed. The grass swayed though there was no wind, and somewhere in the deepening dark, faint and impossible, I heard it, a bell, ringing, slow and mournful, from a church that hadn't stood in that field for over 100 years. I should have run. Every rational part of my mind screamed at me to get back in the car and drive until the sound disappeared behind me. But I didn't run, because for the first time since I was 11 years old, I saw something flicker at the edge of that field. A warm, golden light, like a window glowing in a house that didn't exist. And standing in that light for just a moment, I saw the unmistakable silhouette of an old man in a wool coat. The silhouette vanished the moment I blinked, swallowed back into the dark like a held breath being released. I stood frozen at the edge of that field for what felt like an hour, though my phone later told me it had only been 4 minutes. 4 minutes of absolute stillness, my heart slamming against my ribs, every instinct in my body torn between the rational man who had built a quiet life in the city and the 11-year-old boy who had never stopped believing his grandfather. I almost left. I want to be honest about that. I almost got back in my car and drove away from Hollow Creek forever, the way I had 19 years ago, the way that had let me sleep at night for almost 2 decades. But then the bell rang again, closer this time, and beneath it I heard something that broke whatever resolve I had left. A voice, faint, distorted, as if traveling through water or time, but unmistakably my grandfather's voice, calling my name the way he used to when I was a boy hiding in the cornfields, pretending I couldn't hear him. Eli! I walked into the field. The grass came up to my knees, then my waist, swallowing the dirt road behind me until I couldn't see my car anymore, couldn't see the tree line, couldn't see anything except that single golden light flickering somewhere ahead. The temperature kept dropping with every step, and the silence, that deliberate watching silence, pressed in around me like a held breath waiting to be released. And then, without any sense of transition, without any moment I could point to and say this is where it happened, I was standing in Hollow Creek. It was not a ruin. That's what struck me first, more than the impossibility of the buildings themselves, more than the fact that I was standing in a town that had been erased from the earth a century before I was born. It was whole. A dirt main street stretched before me, lined with wooden buildings glowing under lantern light. A general store with its windows fogged from warmth inside, a small white church with its bell tower silhouetted against a sky that held no stars, a schoolhouse with chalk-drawn hopscotch squares still visible on the steps outside. Smoke curled from chimneys. I could smell bread baking somewhere, and wood smoke, and the particular mineral scent of a town built close to a river. But there were no people. I walked down that street, calling out, my voice swallowed by a silence so complete it felt like the town itself was listening rather than answering. Every door I tried was locked. Every window showed warm, lived-in rooms. A table set for dinner, a fire still crackling in a hearth, a child's wooden toy abandoned mid-play on a porch, but no one inside any of them. It was a town frozen in the exact moment of a life interrupted, as though 412 people had simply stood up from what they were doing and walked away into nothing. I found the answer, or at least the beginning of one, in the church. The door wasn't locked. Inside, candles burned along the walls, real flame, real wax dripping down in slow rivulets, though there was no one to have lit them. Rows of wooden pews stood empty, facing an altar where a single object waited, placed with obvious deliberation in the center, a leather-bound book, old enough that its pages had gone the color of weak tea, its cover embossed with a symbol I didn't recognize, a circle split by 3 crooked lines like roots or rivers or veins. I opened it. The handwriting inside was my grandfather's. Page after page after page, dated entries stretching back decades, written in a hand that aged and steadied and aged again across the years, as if he had been adding to this book his entire life, long before I was born, long before he ever told me a single word about Hollow Creek. The entries told a story I was not prepared for. Hollow Creek hadn't been destroyed by some external force, a flood or fire or vengeful spirit, the kind of explanation my child's mind had always wanted. It had made a choice. According to my grandfather's careful, increasingly urgent writing, the town's founders, desperate during a famine that had killed half their children in a single brutal winter, had struck a bargain with something that lived beneath the river, something old enough that it predated any name the settlers had for it. The town would be protected, sustained, kept safe from the suffering of the outside world forever. in exchange, it would step sideways out of time, existing in a fold between one moment and the next, only becoming visible to the world, and only able to take someone new into its protection once every generation, when the right conditions aligned and someone who remembered the old stories came looking. The town didn't disappear, the book explained. It waited, and it called back the descendants of its original founders one at a time to keep its candles lit and its bargain unbroken. My grandfather wasn't just a man who had stumbled onto a frightening mystery 19 years ago. He was a descendant of Hollow Creek's founders. And when he walked into that field and never came back, he hadn't disappeared. He had gone home. The last entry in the book, dated the night before he vanished, was the one that made my hands shake so badly I nearly dropped the candle I'd taken from the wall to read by. Eli is too young to understand yet, but the blood runs in him too. I prayed it would skip him. I prayed he'd live a full life out there, never knowing, never called. But the town is patient, and it always finds its own. If you are reading this, Eli, then it has called you, and I am sorry. I am so sorry. But I need you to understand, this is not a trap. It is a choice. The town needs someone to renew the bargain every generation, or everyone inside it. Everyone I have grown to love in 19 years among them will be lost forever, scattered into whatever lies beyond the fold we created. I have done my part. Now it is yours to make. I sat down hard on the front pew, the book trembling in my lap, and for a long moment I simply couldn't breathe. 19 years of grief, of forced rationality, of carefully built distance from a single folded coat in a field, all of it collapsed at once under the weight of a truth far stranger and far heavier than anything I had imagined. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, candle raised, half expecting some ancient guardian, some creature from beneath the river my grandfather had written about with such careful dread. Instead, standing in the church doorway, looking exactly as he had the day he vanished, not a day older, his wool coat draped over one arm, was my grandfather. "You shouldn't have come," he said, though his eyes, wet with 19 years of unspoken longing, told a different story than his words. "But I'm so glad you did." He explained what the book could not. The bargain required renewal at a precise moment. Tonight, the same alignment of seasons that had called him here 19 years before. And it required a willing choice from someone of the founding blood. If no one came, if no one chose to renew it, the fold holding Hollow Creek together would collapse by morning, and everyone inside, 412 souls who had aged only 19 years across more than a century of borrowed time, people who had become his neighbors, his friends, his second family, would be lost to whatever existed in the space between moments, erased, truly and finally, the way the rest of the world already believed they'd been erased long ago. "But if I stay," I said slowly, understanding dawning with a cold weight in my chest, "I disappear too, like you did. My life, my friends, everyone who knows me out there, they lose me the same way I lost you." My grandfather didn't answer right away. He simply looked at me with an expression I recognized instantly, because I had worn it myself for 19 years. The look of a man carrying an impossible choice he never wanted to hand to someone he loved. "The town doesn't trap anyone, Eli," he finally said. "It only asks. What you choose next, that's yours alone. But the sun is rising in 6 hours, and once it does, the choice will be made for all of us, whether we like the answer or not." behind him, through the church windows, I could see the first faint hint of gray creeping into that starless sky, and somewhere beneath the town, beneath the river, beneath everything, I felt the old bargain stirring, waiting to hear what I would decide. 6 hours! That was all the time the town had given me to decide the rest of my life and the lives of 412 people who had been waiting in the space between moments for longer than I had been alive. My grandfather led me out of the church and back onto the main street, and this time, as we walked, the town began to wake. Lanterns brightened in windows, doors opened, and one by one the people of Hollow Creek stepped out into the night to see who had come. I don't know what I expected. Ghosts, maybe. Pale, hollow figures trapped in some half-existence, the way every story about vanished towns had taught me to imagine them. But they weren't that at all. They were simply people. A baker, dusted in flour, wiping his hands on his apron. A young mother holding a sleeping child against her shoulder. An old woman who reminded me painfully of my own grandmother, smiling at me from her porch as though I were an expected guest arriving fashionably late to dinner. They looked at me with curiosity, not fear, and several of them looked at my grandfather with something close to relief. "This is the boy you spoke of," the baker said, his voice warm despite the gravity of the moment. "The one who might save us, or might choose to leave us be." "He has a name?" my grandfather said gently. "Eli." They knew. All of them knew exactly what stood between sunrise and oblivion, and yet none of them begged me. None of them pressured me. None of them treated me as anything other than a young man facing an enormous decision. That restraint affected me more than pleading ever could have. These were people who had already sacrificed an entire connection to the outside world to protect each other. They weren't about to start demanding sacrifices from someone else. My grandfather walked me through the town as the hours burned away, and with every street corner, every familiar face, every story he told me about the life he had built inside that fold, the friendships, the small joys, the quiet, hard-won peace of a community that had chosen to protect its most vulnerable rather than let a famine take them one by one. I understood something I hadn't expected to understand. This wasn't a prison. It had never been a prison. It was a refuge built out of desperation by people who loved each other enough to give up their place in ordinary time to keep their children fed and their elders safe. But refugees have a cost, and the cost, I learned as the sky continued to lighten, fell heaviest on whoever chose to keep the door open. "If I renew the bargain," I asked my grandfather, as we stood once more at the edge of the field, the town glowing softly behind us, "what happens to me? Truly, not the version you write in a book for someone too young to ask hard questions." He didn't soften it. I think after 19 years, he had decided I deserved that much honesty. "You step outside of ordinary time the way I did, you won't age the way the world out there ages. Not quickly, not the way you're used to. You'll watch the years pass through whoever you keep in your heart out there, and you won't be able to reach them. The world will move on without you, exactly as it moved on without me. And in another generation, you'll have to do what I did tonight. Wait and hope and pray that whoever comes is strong enough to choose." It was, I realized, exactly the sentence I had been dreading. A life traded for other lives. A door held open at the cost of every door I might have walked through otherwise. A career I had built. Friendships I had nurtured. A future I had quietly, privately imagined for myself in the ordinary, unremarkable world outside that field. But there was another question underneath that one, and it was the question that actually mattered. Not what do I lose, but what happens to them if I don't? I asked it anyway, needing to hear it spoken aloud. If I walk away, I said, if I get back in my car and drive home and let the sun rise without making a choice, what happens to everyone here? To you? My grandfather's eyes, the same eyes that had watched me grow up, that had taught me to fish in a river 3 miles from here, that had told me a bedtime story 19 years ago that turned out to be the truest thing anyone had ever told me. Those eyes held mine without flinching. We disappear, he said simply, not into another fold, not into some other refuge waiting on the other side, into nothing. The bargain ends, and everything it protected ends with it. 412 people gone the way the world already believes we're gone. Except this time, it would actually be true. The sky behind the church tower had turned the soft gray of true dawn approaching, the stars long since faded, the first hint of gold beginning to bleed along the horizon. Somewhere in the town behind us, I could hear the baker's oven, the soft murmur of families gathering, ordinary morning sounds from a town living on borrowed time, unaware whether this particular morning would be its last. I thought about my apartment in the city, my job, the friends who would notice I was missing eventually and grieve in their own way, the life I had spent 19 years carefully constructing specifically so I would never have to think about a field, a folded coat, or a grandfather who disappeared without explanation. I thought about how hollow that life had always felt underneath its careful normalcy, how I had never quite shaken the sense that something essential had been stolen from me the night my grandfather walked into this field, how every relationship I had built since then had carried a quiet, unexamined distance, as though some part of me had never stopped waiting for an answer to a question I'd convinced myself didn't exist. And I thought about the mother with the sleeping child on her shoulder, who had looked at me not with desperation, but with the calm trust of someone who believed somehow that the world still produced people willing to choose kindness over comfort. I want to ask you something, I said to my grandfather, and I want the truth. Did you ever regret it? 19 years in this fold? Did you ever wish you'd let the sun rise without you? He smiled, and it was the most genuine smile I had seen on his face since I arrived. More genuine, even, than the relief of seeing me again. Every single day I missed you, Eli. That regret never left me, and it never will. But regret and rightness aren't opposites. I would make the same choice again tomorrow and the day after and every day for the rest of however long I have. Because the alternative wasn't a version of my life where I got to keep you and save them. The alternative was a version of my life where I went home and somewhere behind me 400 people simply stopped existing because I valued my own comfort over their survival. I couldn't live with that ghost. I don't think you could either. He was right. I think I had known it from the moment I read his final journal entry in that church. Known it, and spent the hours since trying to find some clever third option, some way to save everyone without giving anything up myself. There wasn't one. There never had been. That was the entire weight of the bargain, the reason it had been built to fall on one willing person at a time instead of being solved once and for all. Because some kinds of love only mean something when they cost you something. The sun broke fully over the horizon as I made my decision, gold light spilling across the field and catching the church's white steeple, and I felt the town behind me hold its breath one final time. I choose to stay, I said. I renew the bargain. The words left my mouth, and the field seemed to exhale, a low, resonant hum rising from somewhere beneath the earth itself, beneath the river, beneath the very foundations of a town that had been waiting 100 years for someone to say exactly those 5 words. The golden light around Hollow Creek brightened, then steadied, then settled into something that felt less like magic and more like relief, the particular physical relief of a held breath finally released. My grandfather placed his hand on my shoulder, and for the first time since I'd seen him standing in that church doorway, he looked entirely, completely at peace. "Welcome home, Eli," he said. Behind him, the town of Hollow Creek began its ordinary morning, bread rising in ovens, children waking for school, the baker calling out a greeting to a neighbor. 413 souls now, safe inside a fold in time, kept whole by a choice that cost everything and saved everything all at once. I never went back to the city. I never explained myself to the people who noticed I was missing. Somewhere out there, my disappearance probably looks exactly like my grandfather's once did, unexplained, unsolved, a quiet tragedy with no satisfying ending. But here, inside this field that the world has forgotten, I have an entire town that remembers exactly what I did and why I did it. And someday, when the cycle comes around again, when the right person with the right blood comes looking for answers about a town that shouldn't exist, I'll be the one standing in a doorway, candle in hand, asking them to make the same impossible, necessary choice my grandfather once asked of me. Some doors only stay open because someone chooses, again and again, to hold them. Eli's story isn't really about a vanished town or a hidden bargain or a fold in time. It's about the quiet, unglamorous truth that real love almost never asks for a grand gesture. It asks for a sacrifice nobody will ever see or applaud. It asks you to give up your comfortable, ordinary life so that someone else's life can simply continue. We like to imagine heroism as loud and visible, but the deepest kind of heroism looks like Eli standing in a field at dawn, trading every familiar thing he knew for the safety of people who couldn't save themselves, not because it was easy, but because the alternative was unbearable. So here's the question worth carrying with you. What door in your own life is only staying open because someone somewhere chose to hold it? And what door might be waiting for you to do the same? Because, in the end, the towns that survive, and the people who hold them together, are built on exactly one thing. Someone willing to stay when leaving would have been so much easier. If this story captured your imagination, there's much more to come. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale. Until next time, take care and keep wondering.